when you see that? Cool. All right. Okay. Okay, cool. I got some thumbs up. All right, guys. So again, what is tonight's training about? It's about the principles of valuation and also the practical use of valuation, right? Why is it the most important? Because everything is based on valuation, right? So what we're going to cover tonight is we're going to go over property valuation based on income, okay? We're going to go over cap rates. We're going to go over some definitions and so forth that you need to know and understand. And then we're going to go over some other important metrics when considering valuation of commercial properties. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, because I would be remiss if I didn't, right? Underwriting, you're going to hear that term a lot, right? It's the process of quantitatively evaluating a real estate investment for its viability and potential. Bottom line is you're putting a price tag on a property. Very, very simple, okay? You're understanding based on the information given to you by how the property performs, what the value is at that given moment, right? There's a big debate, right? People talk about cap rates, they talk about rates of return, whatever. Just know that a cap rate, right? And we're going to get to that in just a second, is just a snapshot in time of the property's value. Just want to be very clear about that, but we'll get to that in just a second, right? So here's the thing. Property valuation based on income. Now we're going to take it back before we get into the definitions here, right? Property, there's three ways of valuing property. Can anybody tell me what those three ways are? We're going to cover income, okay? But can anybody tell me the other two ways that property is valued, right? If like an appraiser looks at a property, he or she is going to look at it from a few different lenses. One lens is going to be income approach, which we're going over right now. The other approach, right, is going to be what they use in the residential side. Oh, you got cost. Okay, love it. Yep. So the replacement cost. So if heaven forbid a tornado came and sucked this property up off the face of the earth and you're left with just the land, what would it cost to replace the building that was there? Okay. And then finally, we're dealing with comparative sales, right? So like it's used a lot more in residential and also in owner user property. But the question is, okay, what is this property worth if an owner user, excuse me, is occupying it, and the property across the street was an owner user and it sold for $2 million, and the one down the road it was a similar use and it sold for X, right? That's the comparative sales approach. It's used all the time in residential. Basically, if you have a house with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a swimming pool, you can adjust other sales in the area to get like a good, a pretty accurate number. And on the residential side, it's very easy to determine value, right? But what we're going to be covering tonight is going to be the income approach. Now, and here's the thing, I'm just as a little side note, the reason why there's such bigger swings in residential properties than as opposed to commercial is because residential, when you're using comparative sales, like you see what's happened the last year and a half after COVID, the price has gone up and up and up and up and up. And guess what? The value of properties, because of the approach, the valuation approach that they're using, just keeps going up and up and up. That's problematic. Whereas when you're considering commercial real estate, and I mean income producing real estate, being that people are locked into year, 2, 3-year leases, or even up to 5-year leases, right? Their rents only increase incrementally, which means from one year to the next, the rent's going to go up 3%. Guess what? The value of the building only goes up about 3%. So you're not going to get these huge upswings like you've been seeing on the residential side due to the fact that they use the comparative sales approach. You guys with me? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. And now you're like, oh, that's why residential goes really high and then crashes, and commercial we kind of chug along. We've had crashes before, but when it's based on the income of the tenants are paying, that's when it's really important to understand, right? So cool. I'm glad you guys get that. So that you're not going to get as big a swings. You'll get dips, but as long as the tenants are paying the rent, it's going to make a lot more sense, right? Or I should say, it's going to be a lot less volatile. So it makes more sense, in my opinion, to invest in commercial. Okay, so as you see on the screen, right? Basic formula, it's very, very simple. Okay, you have your income, you have your expenses, and then you just subtract the expenses from the income and you get your net income. Okay, very, very simple. Okay, we're going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to go around, right? So we have your rental income, which pretty standard, straightforward. There's income that comes from your rents. You have your additional income, and we're going to cover that on the next slide, which is going to equal your potential gross income. Now, Not every building is 100% full 100% of the time, and you're not ever able to collect every single dollar of rent 100% of the time, right? So you have to apply what's called a vacancy and collection loss credit, which means, you know, let's say you're making $100 a month, right? You know, maybe, 5% of the time you don't collect that entire 100, 1 out of 20 months, you wind up having someone move out or something along those lines. That's when you have to apply a factor, in case the building is empty, in case you're unable to collect rents, right? So you collect, and it's usually based on a percentage, right? So when you subtract from the potential gross income, you subtract out the vacancy and collection loss, you're left with the EGI, or the effective gross income, okay? And then from the EGI, you subtract out the operating expenses, right? And you are left finally with the good old famous NOI, or net operating income. You guys with me? Everybody with me so far? Cool. Okay. So now we're going to take this a step further. We're going to explain these things just a little bit better, right? As you see over on the left side, we have rental income, additional income. Rental income, pretty straightforward. Like I said, rents from tenants. Now, guys, additional income. Let's kind of brainstorm a little bit. Let's think of some things that would be income to a building, but they are not from rents, right? So I'm going to give you two examples. I'm going to give you laundry. I'm going to give you parking, right? Let's say like in an apartment building, right? Can you guys give me a couple other examples of what might constitute additional income to a property? Think of all the things that you might see in an office building or an apartment building or something like that. Amber, vending, boom, dead on, awesome, really, really good. Can anybody else think of anything else, right? Here's an interesting thing. I live in an apartment building where they don't own the gym. I should say they don't run the gym. They actually lease the gym out to a third party, and tenants have to pay for the gym. So that's actually a additional income. Brian says laundry. Awesome. Yeah. Orlando says ATM. Good. Yeah, exactly, guys. Like I like how you're thinking outside the box. So yes, there's a bunch of different ways, whether it's laundry, parking, vending, ATMs, whatever that might be, anything that is not rent-based, but it is income to a multifamily, retail, or office building, what have you. That's also going to be, it could be special events parking. Maybe the office building has a huge parking lot, and across the street from here we have Dolphin Stadium, right? Like you can make money off that, right? Business office, pet fees. Yeah. There you go. Okay. Good. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and anything that's going to bring in income that's not. I see Amber said coffee. Anything that's going to bring money in. Maybe street vendors are allowed out there, but they have to get a if it's an office building, but they have to get a license from the building to be able to have their street kiosk or whatever outside the apartment building, whatever that might be, right? So collection loss, like I said, is non-paying tenants, right? Vacancy loss, obviously people, if they move out and the building is empty for a certain period of time, that's going to affect the rental income, okay? So that you have to factor that in. Now, operating expenses, guys, R and R, those are the two words you have to remember under operating expenses, right? Because there are operating expenses and there are what are called capital expenses, okay? Very, very important. And then some people might say, they're all the same, whatever. They're not the same. Yes, they're both expenses, but the way your accountant looks at them, I promise you, will be very different. Here's what I mean, right? Can anybody, I see a couple of my students around here, right? Can anybody tell me the two R's, right? We have recurring, right? And the two R's that describe operating expenses. Can anybody else tell me what the other R is? And then if you remember these two R's, you'll never ever question what an operating expense is, right? So if you remember, right? Regular and recurring. Regular and recurring. Everybody type in the chat for me, regular and recurring. Seriously, this will help this information stick in your brain. By the way, guys, the more you interact throughout this, the more, and science has shown, like neuroscience shows, the more you see, you hear, you interact, even if you say it out loud, like the more you type, the more you use multiple senses, the more your brain will retain this information for recall when the time comes, okay? So absolutely, there we go, love it. Amber's in. Maria's in, Michael's in, Shai's in, Rosa, love it. Yeah, guys, regular and recurring, okay? This is how you memorize things, by repetition. The more times you see it and hear it, the more likely you are to be able to recall it in the future, okay? So yes, regular and recurring. So now operating expenses have to do, they're the recurring expenses for the ongoing operation of the property. Okay, now I gave a few examples here. Taxes, insurance, lawn maintenance, CAM, which stands for common area maintenance, right? Snow removal, utilities, right? Awesome, awesome, good guys, good. Yes, love it, right? Regular and recurring, right? These are all regular and recurring, right? Taxes, insurance, lawn maintenance, CAM, snow removal, utilities, janitorial, right? Anything like that you're going to see. Maybe it's a water bill if the water meter is in the landlord's name. Maybe it's I said utilities. Like, if they're lighting the parking lot of an office building or whatever, and the landlord pays for it, that's also falls under utility and is regular and recurring. Now, I'm going to put you guys to the test. Okay, can anybody tell me what type of expense is non-regular? I should say, give me an example of an expense that's non-regular recurring, right? So that's what we call a capital expense. So guys, fire off. There are no bad answers. I want everybody that's on right now, I expect to see everybody guessing. Give me a guess. Give me something that is an expense of the property, but it's not something that comes out every week or every year or every quarter or every 6 months, right? Amber says new roof, like it. Brian says foundation repair, I like it. Okay, good, good, good. Anybody else? What do we got? New parking lot, yes. MJ, heck yeah. New pavement, yes, yes. Good, 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 good. Come on, guys. There's a few more. There's a few more. What keeps the building warm in the winter and cool in the summer? Parking lot maintenance. Yes, Robbie. Yes, way to go. Absolutely. You guys are getting this. I love it. I love it. Keep coming back. The more more repetition you get, the more likely you are to recall this stuff. Brian Harris says capital improvements like roof, brickwork. Yes, yes, yes. Amber says HVAC. Now we're talking, guys. These are all things, right? Brian said air conditioners. These are all things that you don't use every year, right? Or I should say you don't incur these costs every year. They're every once in a while. Now, people ask, like, what's the difference between capital and operating expenses, right? Because at the end of the day, you're saying, what's the difference? It's money out of the landlord's pocket. Aha, yes, but no, okay? You can do what's called expense your operating expenses. So for instance, real simple, $100,000 comes in, $40,000 of operating expenses goes out. You have $60,000 left at the end of the year. Great, easy peasy, right? Okay. Now, here's the thing, right? When it comes to when you go to sell the building, when you can't take expenses twice, right? So either you take it at the end of the year and you expense it, you take it off of your income. So like if you spent, I don't know, $40,000 in operating expenses for a building, right? You're not going to be taxed on that $40,000. You're only going to get taxed on what is left after the expenses, right? But if you went and spent $50,000 on new air conditioners, you can't expense those to deduct off of your income for the year. Those are what are called capital expenditures or CapEx, right? And what that means is, let's say you bought this building for $500,000, right? If you bought the building for $500,000 and you put $100,000 of capital improvements or capital expenditures, right, into it, when you go to sell it for 10 years later for $1 million, you're not going to have to pay taxes on $1 million minus $500,000. What you do is 500,000 is what's called your basis, right? What you do is that your basis gets what's called stepped up, and with whatever you spent in capital improvements, right? So if you put a new roof on it, if you seal coated the parking lot, you put some new AC units in it, and all that stuff cost you $100,000, then you have your purchase price plus cost of acquisitions, plus whatever money you have invested in the building in terms of capital improvements, right? And then you take your new purchase price, whatever you sell it for, or the disposition price, and you subtract out whatever your adjusted basis is. So you'd only be paying taxes on $400,000 instead of $500,000 due to the capital improvements or the capital expenditures. Are you guys with me? Give me a +1 if you're with me. Give me a +2 if you didn't understand that and you want me to go over it, because it's very important. It's very important to understand, especially when valuing a property, the difference between operating expenses and capital expenses. The reason why, if you guys do what I say and you're calling people up and you're getting information on their buildings and you're understanding what constitutes operating expenses, they might just give you a list of all their expenses. Mr. Smith, who owns 123 Main Street. Hey, Mr. Smith, can you do me a favor? Yeah, I want to talk to you about helping you sell your building. Okay, great. All right, do me a favor, send me over your financials. Okay, great. He sends you over a bunch of financials from his accountant, and you're looking at it like, meanwhile, you have to go and you have to pick out the capital expenses, right? Because those are not, guys, the two R's. What are the two R's? Give it to me in the comments. Those capital expenses are not R and R. What are the two R's, right? Give it to me. Give it to me. Okay. If the capital expenses are not regular and recurring, right, then they get added onto the basis. There we go. Way to go, Shad. Yes, Rosa. Yes, MJ. Yes, Orlando. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I'm just going to go back over that. Brian said +2, right? Just remember, guys, when you make $100,000 of gross income, you subtract out your operating expenses, and you're left with $60,000 of net operating income. That's what you pay taxes on, because you are not allowed to. Your operating expenses are tax deductible, right? Now, when it goes time to sell your building, you take whatever you bought it for and you add the capital expenses on top of that, which does what's called stepping up your basis. And then whatever you sell it at minus your stepped up basis, that's what you get charged on. So if you were to just take everything as an operating expense, you'll never step up your basis, right? So that's why it's important to know the difference between operating expenses and capital expenses. And the other thing is, like I mentioned, going back to our previous example, Mr. Jones, who owns 123 Main Street. Hey, Mr. Jones, do me a favor, send me over all your expenses. He might not know the difference between the two. And it's up to us as astute brokers to be able to understand what a building is worth, because when looking at the expenses, knowing, well, that's a capital expense, that's an operating expense, and be able to pick them out. That way you can properly value, because I guarantee you, if you show if you take his financials and you put them onto a spreadsheet and you send them to an investor who knows what they're looking at, they're going to say, wait a minute, roof replacement? That's a capital expenditure, man. That's not an operating expense. Oh, wait, air conditioners? That's a capital expense. Ooh, new windows? That's a capital expense, right? They're going to look at you like you got two heads, or like you don't know what you're talking about. So very, very important to understand the two biggest things, right? But that's really the only variable when it comes to expenses, whether it's capital or operating expense. Okay, cool. All right, now that we know income minus expenses equals your net operating income, right? There's different ways of establishing value based on the information that you're given, right? So the first of which everybody talks about, and frankly, it's the most accurate, is cap rate, okay? Cap rate, like I mentioned before, guys, is, well, we're going to show you, right? And we're going to go over gross rent multiplier, cash on cash, as well as IRR, right? But the cap rate is a relationship, okay? Think of a scale going up and down, very simple. You add something on one side and the other side goes down. You add something on the other side, so they're interrelated, right? It's a relationship between an income producing property's net operating income and its value. Very, very simple, right? Building brings in $100,000. It has a 10 cap. Therefore, the building is worth $1 million. Very simple, easy peasy, right? In this example down below, we have a building that brings in $70,000. And then you divide by $1 million sale price. That gives you a cap rate of 7%. And mind you, guys, cap rate is just a snapshot at one given moment in one of time. Here's what I mean by that, right? At the end of the day, if the littlest thing changes, because it's a relationship, and you take one marble off one side of the scale or one marble off the other side of the scale, it's going to change, right? The relationship is going to change. So if, let's say, you had a big snowstorm, and then it was the middle of winter, they had a big snowstorm, and the tenants all get billed, or there's additional operating expenses, right? When you look at it, what's going to happen is if the expenses increase to the landlord, guess what happens? The income goes down. Income goes down, cap rate goes up because you're making less money. You guys with me, right? So, and mind you, cap rate and value, okay, are inversely related, right? Low cap rate means high value. High cap rate means low value. Okay, so you just got to remember that. Okay, but bottom line is so the cap rate can change at any given time. So just like when you're running, right? you're running a snapshot is going to catch you at a certain point in a certain place in time, and it's always changing. The second you spend $1 on anything, it changes again. Okay, so just as a little FYI. So before somebody mentioned, who was it? It was one of the first folks that were on today. It's gone in the comments, but someone mentioned ERV before, right? ERV is a formula used when valuing income producing properties, right? If you know 2 out of the 3 variables, you can figure out the third. Okay, here's what's cool about it, right? The 3 variables are income, rate, and value. IRV. That's my man ERV. Okay, and he will never steer you wrong, because there's an old saying I like to say. I think I came up with it, but if I didn't, well, then I borrowed it. But I always tell people in a listing presentation, I'm like, just so you know, brokers might tell you stories, but the numbers will never ever lie to you. And that's the cool thing about valuing income producing property. You can't budget. It's not, well, the people down the street sold for this. No, income minus expenses, and you divide by the cap rate. It's literally that simple, right? So check it out. So income is expressed as net operating income. Our rate is expressed as a cap rate, okay? Some people like to use rate of return, but let's be very specific, cap rate, because it's a specific snapshot in a specific moment in time. And V is the value, as in sale price or a dollar figure, okay? So let's look at it. So like I said, just like simple algebra, right? You have, 2 of the variables. I'm sorry, yeah, 2 of the variables, you can figure out the third, okay? If you know the rate and the value, you can figure out the income, right? So for instance, if the building's worth $1 million and the rate of return is 8%, then 0.08 times $1 million is going to give you an NOI of $80,000. The way this works, guys, now it's one thing to understand the theory. Get ready to write this down, okay? Because I'm going to show you what this is worth, okay? Or I should say, I'm going to show you how this applies in the real world, okay? You are working with somebody and they say, hey, I want a building that has an 8% rate of return. Okay, cool. And then so what you need to know is you say, okay, you find a building that has an 8% rate of return. So you'll be able to figure out what the income is you'll be able to figure out what the income is, knowing the sale price of the building and the fact that the rate of return is 8%. Okay. So if you get those 2 factors, then next thing you know, you're going to find out the income. Okay. Very important. Now, here's what's super cool, right? When you know the value and the income, these are 2 things that are given, right? You can figure out the rate. Okay. So for instance, like the same building is worth $1 million and the income is 75,000, then 75,000 divided by $1 million is going to give you a 7.5% rate of return, right? So you know the value and you know the income, you can figure out the rate. Okay. Now what's cool is if you're working with somebody, and we'll get into the next slide, and let's go to the next slide, and then I'll give you some real world examples of this stuff, right? If you know the income and you know the rate, you can figure out the value. So for instance, this same building that's producing $100,000 of annual NOI and the rate of return is 8%, then the value is $100,000 divided by 0.08, okay? This formula works best, and write this down, guys, when you know what the income is and the rate of return that you want is. This will tell you what a buyer is willing to pay for it. Think about it, guys. Mr. Smith says, hey, Charlie, I want this building, and I understand it has $100,000 of NOI, but I want my cap rate to be 8%. This is what I'm willing to pay for the building. Or you need to be able to figure out what that person would be willing to pay for it. What if the NOI was less than that? What if the NOI was, I'll tell you what, let's do a little real world example, guys. What if the NOI is, instead of $100,000, it's $90,000, okay? So let's pull out our trusty dusty calculator, right? All right, and then instead of $100,000 is $90,000, right? And then we still want an 8% rate of return. Can anybody tell me what Mr. Smith, the investor, is willing to pay for this building? So remember, you take your NOI, you divide it by the cap rate that they're willing, the type of return that they want. Okay, so in this case, the NOI is 90,000. You divide it by 0.08, which is what Mr. Smith wants to get in terms of return every year. Okay, what would it be worth? Ooh, Amber, you're on top of it. Yes, indeed, 1,125,000. Right? Okay, why? Because NOI divided by cap rate equals what the person will be willing to pay for the building. Now, what's cool about it is, right, the value, what I always tell people, just like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, value is in the eye of the beholder. When someone, everybody can look at the same exact building, right, and with the same exact NOI, same exact exterior features, same exact neighborhood, and everybody comes up with a different value. Some people think the neighborhood is going down the tubes. They're going to have a much higher cap rate. Remember, a value and cap rate are inversely related, right? So high value, low cap rate, low value, high cap rate, given the same NOI. You with me? Okay. So that's what you got to remember, guys. Okay, so whereas somebody else says, "Oh man, this neighborhood is the next best thing. My money is going to double in no time." Like I got no problem, buying this building for a 5 cap. Guess what? Low cap rate, high value, high cap rate, low value. So everybody can look at the building and say with the same NOI, everybody's going to have a different rating. It's just like pepperoni pizza. Some person might think it's the best thing they ever had. Some people say it's disgusting. They don't eat pepperoni, right? So it's no different. So so the cool thing about these things, guys, is when you're working with a buyer and you know the NOI, you know what type of return they want, then it's very easy to figure out what the value is. Conversely, okay, if you know what the NOI is and you know what the market cap rate is, so like when you're dealing with a seller, okay, so when you have the NOI, so you know the NOI, and you know what the prevailing market cap rate is, right? Let's see, let's go back. Yeah, so if you got your income and cap rate, you'll know what you have to put the building on the market for. You with me? Right. So think of it this way, guys. Okay, the NOI is $100,000, but the prevailing cap rate is a 6.25%. Guys, tell me what that building will be worth with $100,000 of NOI, right? And it's a 6.25% rate of return. Let's figure it out. Anybody? Go ahead and put it in the comments. Put it in the comments. I got it here. All right. This is super important, guys. So on one hand, when a buyer wants X% rate of return, knowing the NOI, you can figure out the value that they're willing to pay for it. And on the flip side is when you're going to list a building for a seller, okay, with $100,000 and a 6.25% rate of return, what would you be putting the building on the market for? This is where the rubber meets the road, guys. Knowing these formulas is great. Now you have to know how to apply them in a real world scenario, okay? And this is how you figure it out, okay? So again, you take what the NOI is, that's the one constant, okay? And because we know the local area cap rate is a 6.25% rate of return, what's that going to give you in terms of rate of return? I'm sorry, in terms of sale price or asking price, I guess is probably the best way to put it, right? What does that look like? Boom, MJ, star student. Yes, indeed, $1.6 million. All right, guys. So that's how we know. That's how we know what the building is worth. That's how we know what we're going to bring it on the market for. Okay, cool, and cool. So, all right, hang on one second. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so now cap rate is not the only metric that people use to value buildings, but it's the most precise one in my humble opinion, and it actually is, because there's no real assumptions, right? Amber says, if the cap rate isn't important to the buyer, what should the minimum cap rate be we aim for? Aha. Well, let's see. The cap rate is important to the buyer because think of it this way, Amber, right? When you're looking, anything that you buy in any market, right? What you're doing is you're buying it in relation to what other things in the market are selling for, right? So for instance, like who here would gladly pay $10 for a can of Coke, right? Like nobody, right? Who here would gladly pay 10 cents for a can of Coke? Well, most people, right? If you drank Coca-Cola. But the reason being because relative to the market is one is expensive and the other one is cheap. It's no different, right? So like for instance, you wouldn't advise your buyer to buy something that's a 3 cap, which is a very high price, if there's a bunch of other 6 caps out there, right? You with me? So the cap rate is important to the buyer in the sense that it is a measure of what other opportunities on the market are worth, right? It's a way of us determining the value, the relationship between value and NOI. Okay, and so we see, well, if other things are a lot more expensive, guess what? This is a good deal. If everything's a lot more cheaper, this is not a real good deal, right? So the cap rate is important to the buyer, right? So now you bring up a really good point. What the cap rate is in New York City is not what it's going to be in El Paso, Texas. It's not going to be what it's in Portland, Oregon. It's not what it's going to be in Miami, Florida. You with me? It's all relative to what's going on inside that local market. We do have, this is a good one. We do have a local market cheat sheet guide that we created. If you guys want to get a real good feel, like a real down and dirty way of figuring out the cap rate is, it's one of my favorite hacks. You could throw me out of an airplane with a parachute and just give me LoopNet and give me a list of phone numbers, and I can figure out what the local area cap rate is. And if you guys download this, like, you'll be able to too. Just put hashtag cap rate cheat sheet, right? And we'll send you out one. But it's super duper helpful for figuring out like what cap rates are doing and how they're established, right? Okay, so which is why like they're super duper important because to me they're the most precise way of valuing any income producing property. Okay, now a gross rent multiplier. Some people like to use this. You learn it in every textbook and every real estate course, but it's a ratio of the real estate investment's value to its annual rental income before accounting for expenses such as property tax, insurance, and utilities. Well, guess what? It isn't worth, it's not worth a thing because I'll give you an example, right? Now here, the only buildings that it is worthwhile for are triple net buildings, because triple net buildings technically by definition don't have property tax, insurance, and utilities that are the responsibility of the owner, right? But for every other lease type and every other situation, gross rent multiplier doesn't mean diddly do. And I'll tell you why. Two buildings side by side, both of them are bringing in $100,000 a year of NOI. One of them has $30,000 of operating expenses, okay, which means that their NOI is $70,000. And the other one has $50,000 of operating expenses, which means the NOI is 100 minus 50 or 50,000, right? So this one has an NOI of 70,000. This one has an NOI of 50,000. But guess what? Because the gross rent multiplier is a multiple of the top line revenue or the annual rental income before accounting for expenses, those two buildings will be valued exactly the same by using the GRM or the gross rent multiplier, okay? They are not at all the same if you look at it from a cap rate perspective, because cap rate is used by taking the net operating income and applying a cap rate to it. You with me? So you could just throw GRM out the window. It's good to know, but it makes no sense. Orlando says it's like the BMI, which is useless. Absolutely, because technically a super shredded like bodybuilder is technically obese according to a BMI, even though they could have very, very low body fat. That's a really, really good comparison, right? GRM is a number of years the property would take to pay for itself in gross rents received. I don't know about you guys, but just about anyone else I know has bills. Anyone that pays bills knows that you can't take into account what your top line revenue is. You have to go by your bottom line revenue, because it doesn't matter, like Warren Buffett always says, it doesn't matter what you take in, it's what you put in your pocket, right? You could have crazy expenses and have a 10% profit margin, and you're going to put in a whole lot less than the guy that has a 90% profit margin. You with me? Okay, cool. All right, guys, we just covered just like the tip of the iceberg, right? I tell my students all the time, you have to go from knowing to owning, right? It's not about learning these skills until you get them right. Like, yeah, I recognize this, or like, yeah, I can figure this out. You need to be able to be like sparring, like Mike Tyson, right? Comes at you and you can bob and weave. You need to be able to understand this stuff on such a granular level that you could stand toe to toe with a $50 million investor that's got properties everywhere, right? And explain to Mr. Smith, who owns $50 million of real estate, why your number works and his number doesn't. That's the difference between knowing and owning, right? Owning is when you know in your heart of hearts, this is what it's worth, and I'm going to prove it to you. Just like a lawyer does in a court of law, they build a very, very logical stream of like very, very logical argument, right? But yeah, so you need to be able to do the exact same thing. That's the difference between knowing something and being like, yeah, I could do that. I could figure it out on a cocktail napkin, to knowing it intuitively off the top of your head and to be able to defend it in a high pressure situation, because trust me, people that are very successful investors, they love to show you how much they know, okay, and they love to try to show you what you don't know. And good brokers can stand toe to toe with anybody, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation where I know that I know more than the guy that owns the building about how his building is operating and so forth, only because I know these principles inside and out, upside down, right? So that's the thing. That's where I want all of you guys to get to. Forget owning, forget knowing. I want to get you to the point where you're knowing, where you can argue upside down, backwards and forward. If you ever got into an argument of like what 1 and 1 equals, could you defend that argument? Of course. How about 1 and 1 and 1? Yeah, you can probably defend that too. 2 times 2 is what? 4. What? It always will be, right? So that's the important part, guys. I want you to be able to have such a rock solid bedrock foundation of this stuff, so that you know it internally and what you can, and you're able to defend your price, because that's when you start really when you can start pricing properties properly and not just taking what the owner is wants for it, or and so forth. That's what you need. Brian says that CCIM belt. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ron says your lender's gonna be your most valuable resource in researching local area expenses. Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's so fun. Ron, you're tied right in. So that valuation cheat sheet, the local area cap rate cheat sheet, that's one of the things I said is call up a bunch of local lenders and they'll tell you what deals are going for. Call up local brokers, they'll tell you what the deals are going for. So absolutely, that's a really, really good point. So guys, thanks for hanging out. I know it's been a long day. You're probably going to work a long time. I appreciate you being here, right? Like I said, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to educate people, trying to help people get to the point where they can understand these concepts, apply them in their business, and make more money so that they can have, better things for themselves, their family, and their community, right? So let us help you master these concepts and make bigger commissions as a result. Because last time I checked,